Robert Wykel was a retired metal worker and restaurant owner, a kind of Renaissance man whose passion was restoring classic cars.
He was 66 years old and he was in tip-top shape, and he loved to travel, he loved to hunt and fish, he loved his old cars. That was like his complete life at that point.
In the spring of 1996, he was set to work on another car with his grandson, but it was a project he would never even start.
Suddenly, it's March 1996. I can't get my dad on the phone. The kids can't get him on the phone. No one knows where he is.
Robert Wykel was missing. His family would never see him again.
We've been through 15 years of searching, investigating, 2 trials. Today, March 13th, 2011, we're here for the sentencing of Mr. Wynn.
50-year-old Myron Wynn was convicted of first-degree murder by a King County jury.
Well, Mr. Wynn is probably considered to be a drifter, a man with very little means. If he did have a job, they were short-lived, and he appeared to be a person that would kind of take the easy way out to earn money.
Our theory is that the defendant was a deal maker who liked to act as middleman for people and would promise goods in exchange for money, take the money, and then not come through.
In the spring of 1996, Wynn started showing up at Robert Wykel's morning coffee group at a McDonald's in Burien.
He learned Mr. Wykel was interested in cars, and his eyes lit up, and this was yet another deal he could make to get money but not come through, which is his history.
The bait, an old classic Thunderbird. Wynn told Mr. Wykel he knew of one for sale. On a March afternoon, the two left in Wykel's car to make a deal.
And so we think that he went out with Mr. Wykel on the pretense of finding the car, and there was no car to find. And so as a diversion, the defendant took Mr. Wykel to his sister's property, Mother Nature's Acres in Thurston County.
There's a campground on the property, and it's roughly 140 acres of heavy treed property.
It's the last place Robert Wykel was ever seen alive.
He told him he could find him a car. Mr. Wykel gave him $1,000 up front. The defendant said, okay, I'll go show you this car, but we don't think there ever was a car. And Mr. Wykel, unlike the defendant's other scam victims, was too smart for that and caught on. And we believe that on that day, he confronted the defendant and said, I want my money back. There's no car. I'm going to call the police. And the defendant panicked, and we believe probably killed him, either intentionally or in the course of just trying to keep that $1,000 and steal from him.
But Mr. Wykel's body has never been found. To convict Wynn, prosecutors had to present what they call a mountain of circumstantial evidence. They described the victim's apartment.
The fact that his favorite suitcase was still in his apartment, his clothes were still in his apartment, his toiletries, his razor, there was molding food in the sink, there was coffee still in the coffee pot, there was an unfinished glass, a drink on the counter. He clearly had left that morning not knowing he was never going to return.
Wykel's car turned up at a Burien park and ride. His family doubts he would have ever just left the restored Mercedes behind. And then there was the victim's diamond ring.
Mr. Wykel had a diamond ring that he wore every single day, and all of a sudden, around the same time Mr. Wykel disappeared, the defendant ended up with a diamond that he presented to his girlfriend that ended up being the same size, the same type as the one that Mr. Wykel had worn. And perhaps most telling, and I think what was most effective in this case, was that the defendant lied constantly. When he first talked to police at the very beginning of the investigation, he completely left out that he had traveled on that day with Mr. Wykel, that he was the last person seen with him. We know why he did that, because he didn't want to be accused of the murder, but that was a huge piece of evidence for the jury ultimately.
I know that Mike Wynn has told many different stories to me as well as the detectives. This was brought out in court in great detail during the trial. My father only went by one name, the name that he was born with, and that was Robert James Wykel. He never needed to change his story. He always stood by the meaning of truth.
After 15 years, 2 trials, and dozens of witnesses, Myron Wynn was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murder of Robert Wykel.
It's justice delayed, but justice delayed doesn't need to be justice denied. It can be 15 years and people still care.